Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we're diving into one of the most incredible journeys ever told. The complete story of the Bible, from the creation of the world to the apocalypse. Think about this for a moment. What if I told you that the story of humanity, our past, our present, and even our future, was already written in a single book that has survived thousands of years? A book filled with wonder, beauty, love, betrayal, war, miracles, and a promise that the end is not really the end. That book is the Bible, and its story is unlike anything you've ever heard. The story begins in silence, before time itself, when there was nothing but a formless void. Then, in a single act of unimaginable power, God spoke. Light shattered the darkness. Seas were separated from the land. Stars lit up the heavens, and life filled the earth. From the very first breath of creation, the stage was set for a story that would carry through generations. At its heart, this is not only the story of the universe, it is the story of people, of human beings trying to understand who they are, why they exist, and what their purpose is under heaven. We meet the first characters, Adam and Eve, walking in a perfect garden, a paradise where they could speak directly with God. But perfection doesn't last long. A choice is made, temptation wins, and suddenly the world is changed forever. What was once unbroken is now fractured, and humanity begins its long, painful journey through history. This is where the themes of the Bible first take shape: creation, fall, judgment, and redemption. And from this moment, the story only grows larger, spanning nations, kings, prophets, and promises that echo through time. As we follow this story, we will meet figures who shaped faith itself. Noah, who built an ark when the world was drowning in corruption. Abraham, called to leave everything behind and trust a promise that seemed impossible. Moses, who faced down the might of Pharaoh to lead a people to freedom. David, the shepherd boy who became a king. And then a carpenter's son who would walk dusty roads, heal the sick, challenge empires, and claim to be the Son of God. Each life is part of a larger plan, weaving together into a story that is both deeply human and completely divine. But this story doesn't end with peace. It moves forward into visions of kingdoms rising and falling, battles of light and darkness, and the final book, the Apocalypse, or Revelation, where the fate of the world is unveiled. There we are told of a final clash, a new heaven and earth, and the restoration of all that was broken in the beginning. And yet, as we begin this journey together, there is a question that lingers like a shadow. If the story of creation was meant to be perfection, why did it all go wrong? And more importantly, what comes next? When Adam and Eve stepped out of the garden, the world they entered was nothing like the paradise they had once known. The ground was harder, the work was endless, and even the air seemed heavier with sorrow. This was the beginning of humanity's struggle, a struggle not only to survive, but to understand why life had shifted from perfection to pain. The Bible describes this moment as the breaking point where the bond between God and mankind was tested. Yet, even in the midst of loss, there was a promise whispered into history. One day, redemption would come. That single promise would guide generations, even when they could not see how it would be fulfilled. As the family of Adam and Eve grew, so did the complexity of the human story. Brothers rose against brothers, jealousy spilled into violence, and the first taste of death became a reality. It was no longer just a matter of surviving in a world of thorns and storms. It was about facing the darkness that lived inside the human heart. The Bible makes it clear that people were capable of greatness, but also of terrible mistakes. And as time passed, those mistakes spread across the earth, shaping nations and carving paths that would either bring them closer to God or drive them further away. Soon, the world became so full of corruption that it seemed beyond repair. People chased their own desires, ignored wisdom, and filled the earth with cruelty. But here again, the story surprised everyone with a twist. Instead of letting everything collapse into chaos, God chose a man named Noah. He was not perfect, but he walked with faith. Noah was given an impossible task: to build an ark large enough to save his family and every kind of living creature, while a flood would wipe away the violence and start the world anew. Imagine the suspense of that moment. One man building something so massive, surrounded by neighbors who mocked him, unable to believe that judgment was coming. And yet, the rain did fall. The floodwaters washed away what had been, and the ark drifted as a fragile reminder that even in judgment, there was mercy. When the waters finally receded, a rainbow appeared in the sky, a sign of a covenant, a promise that the world would not be destroyed in the same way again. But while the earth had been cleansed, the human heart still carried the same flaw. The struggle between obedience and rebellion, hope and despair, light and darkness, was far from over. And as humanity spread once more across the land, building cities, chasing power, and searching for meaning, the question only grew louder. Could there ever truly be a way back to the perfection that was lost? As generations passed after the flood, humanity's desire to build, conquer, and rise above one another grew stronger. People gathered in the land of Shinar and began constructing a tower that would reach the heavens itself. The Tower of Babel. It was not just bricks stacked on top of each other. It was a monument to human pride, a declaration that mankind could rise without God. But the tower never reached its goal. Instead, language was confused, voices turned into noise, and people scattered across the earth. What seemed like a united dream broke into fragments, and from that day forward, division and misunderstanding became part of the human story. Yet even as people scattered, God's plan kept moving forward. In the middle of all this conflict, one man named Abram, later Abraham, was called to leave his homeland and step into the unknown. His story was one of faith and doubt, courage and weakness. Imagine being told that through you, all nations on earth would be blessed, even when you had no children and no clear path. Abraham's journey was not just about reaching a promised land. It was about wrestling with trust, with waiting, with believing in something bigger than himself. Meanwhile, the world around him was still restless. Kingdoms rose, wars broke out, and families carried both hope and heartbreak in their bloodlines. From Abraham's descendants came stories of betrayal among brothers, slavery in foreign lands, and the long cry for freedom. Each subplot added another layer to the conflict, the tension between God's promise and the reality of human weakness. The deeper we go, the more the question sharpens. Could this fragile line of people really carry the weight of a promise that seemed impossible? Or would the story collapse under the weight of its own failures? Abraham's descendants carried his promise like a fragile torch through centuries of struggle. From Isaac to Jacob, from Jacob to his 12 sons, the story grew heavier with each generation. The family was torn apart by jealousy when Joseph, a favored son, was sold into slavery by his own brothers. What seemed like betrayal became the spark that led them into Egypt, where famine drove the family to survive under foreign rule. Yet Egypt, once a refuge, slowly transformed into a place of chains. The people who were meant to inherit a promise became slaves, their cries rising day and night, echoing into heaven. Out of this suffering came a leader, Moses, who confronted the most powerful empire of his time. With signs and wonders, plagues and parted seas, he led his people into freedom. But even freedom carried conflict. In the wilderness, the Israelites wrestled with fear, doubt, and rebellion. They stood at the edge of a promised land, yet often turned back in their hearts to the comfort of Egypt. The tension grew between what was offered to them and what they were willing to believe. Generations passed, and the promise narrowed onto kings and prophets. David rose from shepherd to throne, uniting a kingdom with courage, yet falling into sin that tore his family apart. His son Solomon built a temple of breathtaking glory, but even that splendor could not keep the people from drifting into idolatry. Prophets were sent, warning of destruction if hearts would not turn back, and still empires came crashing in: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, each wave pressing the people closer to despair. And yet, through every collapse, whispers of hope continued. A figure was foretold, one who would heal, restore, and reign forever. But who could possibly bear such a weight? The world was waiting, trembling on the edge of something it could not yet see. Just when the world seemed buried in silence, when kingdoms had risen and fallen, and the people wondered if the promise had been forgotten, an unexpected twist entered the story. In a small, overlooked town, far from palaces or thrones, a child was born. This child was not born into wealth or power, but into poverty. His family forced to lay him in a manger because there was no room elsewhere. His name was Jesus. From the very beginning, his life carried mystery and danger. A king feared him so much that soldiers were sent to destroy him, yet somehow he survived, hidden away in Egypt until the time was safe. What made this moment so startling was not just the child's birth, but the way it contradicted expectations. For centuries, people had imagined a deliverer like Moses, a warrior like David, or a king like Solomon. Instead, the one who stepped into history looked ordinary, fragile, almost invisible. Yet whispers spread. He healed the sick with a touch. He spoke words that pierced hearts. He calmed storms with his voice and fed thousands with a handful of bread. And while some followed him with awe, others began to see him as a threat. The conflict that had been growing through centuries now sharpened into a confrontation between heaven's promise and human power. But the tension did not stop there. The more Jesus revealed about himself, the higher the stakes became. He claimed authority not only over sickness or storms, but over sin itself, even death. To many, these were words too great to believe. To others, they sounded like rebellion against the established order. Religious leaders plotted against him. Political rulers kept watch. Crowds swelled around him, some desperate for miracles, others waiting for him to stumble. Every step he took seemed to pull history closer to a breaking point. The story that had begun in Eden, stretched through floods, deserts, kings, and exiles, was now converging on this single life. And as the shadows lengthened, the question grew sharper than ever before. Could this man truly be the answer promised from the very beginning? Or would the weight of expectation crush him before the world could know the truth? The stage was set for the greatest clash yet, but the resolution was still just out of reach. The tension that had been building for centuries finally erupted in Jerusalem. Jesus, the teacher who healed and forgave, was betrayed by one of his closest followers. He was arrested under the cover of night, dragged before religious leaders, and accused of blasphemy. Crowds that once shouted for his miracles now cried out for his death. Soldiers mocked him, pressing a crown of thorns onto his head. And he was sentenced to die on a cross, the most brutal form of execution the empire knew. For his disciples, it felt like the promise had shattered. The one they believed to be the Savior was hanging in defeat, bloodied and broken as darkness covered the land. But here lies the twist that no one expected. The cross, which looked like the end of the story, became the very center of it. In his final breath, Jesus declared that the debt of sin was paid, that the chasm separating humanity from God was bridged. The conflict that began in the garden when Adam and Eve chose disobedience reached its climax on that hill. Death itself seemed victorious for a moment, But the silence of the tomb did not last. On the third day, the stone was rolled away, and the one who had been crucified was alive again. The resurrection turned despair into hope, fear into faith, and defeat into the greatest victory the world had ever known. This moment was more than just a resolution of past conflicts. It was a rewriting of humanity's story. The brokenness that spread from Eden to Babel, from Egypt to Babylon, now had a path to restoration. Yet even as joy spread among his followers, Jesus spoke of another chapter still to come. He promised to return, to bring final judgment and renewal, to establish a kingdom where sorrow and death would be no more. And this final promise leaves us with an unexpected twist. The story is both complete and unfinished. The climax has already happened. The resurrection has secured victory. But the world still waits for the full restoration, the unveiling of a new heaven and a new earth. The suspense lingers because even now history is moving toward that final revelation. And the question remains, are we ready for the ending that has already been written? From the beginning of creation to the cross and the empty tomb, the Bible's story has carried one unbroken theme: humanity's search for meaning and God's relentless pursuit of his people. The resolution does not erase the struggles, but it redefines them. The failures of Adam and Eve, the confusion at Babel, the cries of Israel in Egypt, the rise and fall of kings, all of these threads lead to the same conclusion. Redemption was never out of reach. Through Jesus, the story reaches a point where even death is no longer the final word. Yet the Bible does not close with the resurrection alone. It ends with a vision of what is still to come, a future where justice and mercy meet perfectly. The book of Revelation paints this as the grand finale, a time when every tear will be wiped away, when the pain of history will finally give way to restoration, and when a new heaven and new earth will take the place of what was broken. The apocalypse, often feared, is not just destruction. It is the unveiling of a world made whole again. In this way, the ending circles back to the beginning, restoring what was lost in Eden, but in an even greater way, filled with hope and glory. The complete story of the Bible is not just ancient history or prophecy for the future. It is a mirror for us today. Its characters may have lived thousands of years ago, but their questions are still ours. Why do we suffer? What is our purpose? Can brokenness ever be healed? And the answer the story gives is that we are part of something larger than ourselves, a narrative that stretches from creation to eternity. As the final words of Scripture echo, the invitation is clear. The story is still open for each of us to step into. From the perfection of the garden to the climax of the cross and the promise of the apocalypse, the Bible reminds us that history is not random and our lives are not meaningless. They are part of a design, a story of love, loss, redemption, and ultimate renewal. And though the book closes with a vision of the end, it also leaves us with the greatest beginning, a hope that the last word is never despair, but life everlasting.